Well, welcome to Bootstraps, gentlemen. This is our fourth podcast brought to you by eXPO. And today we have St. Smith from 5070 Oakland Street, Denver, one of your first stops from the airport. And I want to welcome two guests today. Truman Bradley's the CEO of the company, and Caleb, how do you pronounce your last name?
Barkus.
Barkus
Yep.
is the Senior Director of Sales. My true love is sales, so we'll all get along real well today.
There we go. Thank you. Thanks
We had a couple of your other folks on today, and I learned a lot about cultivation, extraction, and we have this enormous following of people that are both businesses and consumers that are yearning to learn more about the industry. So I'm interested as an entrepreneur, CEO of the company, what is the most exhilarating thing for you? I think you started St. Smith about 3 years ago. You know, how did the name come about? What possessed you to get started with this? And what's the most exciting thing about being in this industry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So St. Smith was started about 3 years ago, and it really was in response to seeing a lot of mass-produced, low-quality cannabis coming out of Colorado. You know, as the Industrial Revolution has hit cannabis, obviously, you know, things are shifting more towards automation, and, you know, we were seeing a real drop in quality, and also what I would say is just kind of a losing connection with the plant. It just seemed like the love wasn't there, the finer touches weren't being put in, and ultimately the end consumer was suffering as a result, whether he or she knew it. And so St. Smith really is trying to marry the plant, the seed, with the old school artisanal craftsmanship of old.
Hence the name.
Yeah, hence the name.
Cool.
The real story
Is that a marketing? Did you have to pay a lot of money to figure some marketing person to figure that out?
You know, we hired a marketing firm, and they asked us a bunch of questions and then wrote down our answers and then gave it back to us. It cost us a lot of money. So I guess I'd say yes to your question.
Well, marketing people know how to brand well. So
yeah,
good job.
But thanks a lot. I do think it was important, though. You know, this company was really started to kind of model itself after the craft beer revolution that took Colorado by storm in the 90s and 2000s. And I would use my dad as an example of this. My dad has been a beer drinker for many years, and these days he only drinks IPAs. Well, 10 years ago he didn't even know what an IPA was, but as that education has happened and he's become more discerning, he understands more what it is that he's drinking, and he's got preferences, and that's something that I think Caleb and I both see happening to the cannabis industry as well.
Absolutely. That's really an interesting analogy there to the beer industry. And across the country, I work with the industry from the financial side of matters, which is pretty much a mess out there, and the compliance side. And I never really thought about it like that. Thank you for bringing that out.
Yeah, I think in Colorado especially, I mean, at least in the United States, this is about as mature a market for cannabis as there is. And, other states are coming online all the time and going through a lot of the same hurdles that Colorado faced. I can remember back when recreational cannabis really hit in Colorado, all dispensaries were perceived as the same, all cannabis was perceived as the same, and still that's something even now that we're seeing, that we're really wanting to educate the consumer about, that you would never say, hey, I'm going out to dinner at a restaurant. That would be bizarre. You would name the restaurant. I mean, are we going to fast food? Are we going to Elway's? There's a big difference there. Yeah. And we see that in cannabis as a real a desire to learn more about this incredible plant, whether that's on the medical side or the recreational side. And I think for St. Smith, we really know where our lane is, and it's something that people have been responding well to.
Nice. So how many employees do you have?
We're growing so quickly. The truth is, I'm not totally sure. Right. It's somewhere between 30 and 35. We did a meet and greet about 2 days ago, and I got to meet the newest employees. It's a pretty exciting time at the company, and I'm honestly just kind of hanging on for dear life.
Right. I can relate to that. So from the sales side, describe what you do. I've not met somebody that's the head of sales for a cannabis company before. That sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's really, keeping our finger on the pulse of the industry while, working with our cultivation and working with our extraction lab to come up with new and exciting products. We've got a few things coming down the pipeline that are very exciting, some things that aren't even out in the industry yet. And it also ties obviously into the marketing end of everything. With the dispensary and how things started with our extracts, we had, such a high demand for our extracts that we decided to go the wholesale route, and we are just, business is booming. It has been
So you're selling extracted product.
as well as flour.
And a little while ago, we had Nick here talking about extraction, which was really fascinating. And you got a chemist on your staff, for goodness sake. It's the cannabis industry, and we have chemists now. It's pretty cool.
I mean, I guess so. I actually think it's the only way to do it.
Yeah.
I think
It's
kind of.
definitely an anomaly, though.
Well, I mean, if so, then that's great because that's kind of an obvious competitive advantage. That's how it should be done. I mean, really, Seed & Smith was designed to grow the plant the best possible way, to extract it the best possible way. And so if you're a MIP and you don't have a chemist on board, what are you doing?
That's something that people should be thinking about when they're watching this podcast. I think questioning themselves if they don't have a chemist. So we're taking the extracted product, and we're now going out and selling that to kitchens, other dispensaries. Who's your customer?
Primarily dispensaries. With the flour, we will sell wholesale to other dispensaries as well. You can find Seed & Smith flour at other dispensaries throughout Colorado. Along with our concentrates and
Is that a competitive business? Is there a lot of people doing what you're doing,
Absolutely.
selling?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you differentiate yourself besides having the chemist and the better product? I mean, it seems like it's a crowded market out there.
It is a crowded market, and I think that we put the best foot forward with our quality. I'm not sure if Truman said this yet, but we have a really artisanal and a small batch grow. And it really allows us to focus in on what we're doing on each grow to grow the best product and really, attention to detail. Right. That is big with our company. So our quality, our products, the coloring of our concentrates, everything is top notch. When I first started with Seed & Smith, I had kind of been around the block throughout the industry, and I've worked for some of the largest names in the industry. And when I took my first tour of Seed & Smith, I knocked my socks off, and I instantly knew. I kind of said, this is where I want to be, and we're going to take this thing to the moon because it was,
Right.
just so well done and so well thought out.
So Truman, is that you behind there knocking the socks off, or do you have a team of other people, board of directors? I mean, our audience is always interested in understanding what's behind that bag or that gram that they bought.
I probably can't take very much credit at all, to be honest with you. Typically, we have director meetings once a week with, Caleb and Nick and Parks, some of the other folks as well, logistics and retail. And I often find myself thinking that I'm the dumbest person in the room. I mean, really, with cannabis in a mature market like it is here in Colorado, you really need people who are truly passionate and super knowledgeable about what they do. Caleb was pretty humble in describing his backgrounds, but Caleb has really scaled some of the biggest brands in Colorado cannabis, and that's why when Seed & Smith, it was time for them to accelerate into the wholesale market. I mean, there was really nobody at the top of the list above Caleb, and so
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think where the owners come in is really helping to kind of unite people behind the message and to keep those values of, hyper focus on quality, transparency, things like that. But really, if you were to ask me questions about sales or extraction or production, you would find pretty quickly that the other folks know way more than I do. And that's how it should be.
I agree with you, but unfortunately, a lot of people run a business like a helicopter, helicopter mom, as I call them, hands-on and don't know what they're doing. So,
Well, I welcome those people to join the industry. The water's warm.
So let's talk a little bit about my favorite topic, which is money. The industry started out 2013, so to speak, in Colorado, and a gentleman created Metric. or found metric with Franwell in Florida. We got these nice little tags that track a plant, and product just keeps showing up in large quantities in Kansas and Oklahoma. There was the famous lawsuit. Supreme Court said, control your own inventory, it's your business. How do people get away with not putting tags on plants? I'm always curious about how this large quantity of product just shows up over there in other states, and it's not found. The MED, it just goes right past them. How does that happen?
I'm going to talk a little bit about something that is really just a belief of mine. It's not something that I have any direct experience with. From our perspective, I've put my heart and soul into this business, and we're really proud of the way we run it compliantly. I've got enough skin in the game that I would never cut a corner, even a small one. And so, I'm probably not the best person to ask about diversion to other states and things like that. From somebody who's put both a ton of time and a ton of money into the business, frankly, you would be insane to be, sending things out the back door or anything like that, because it's not worth it. We're a hyper-regulated industry. We get inspected about, I would say, every 2 to 3 weeks, whether it's Denver Fire, Denver Health, the Marijuana Enforcement Division, stuff like that. There's over 100 facilities in our facility. 100 cameras in our facility. And we have to keep 40 days of footage of every single camera. So any inspector can come in and say, I want to see the last 40 days of, your grow room, for example, and we can just show it to them right then and there. So, compliance is something we take really seriously. As far as, news headlines that you might see, of cannabis showing up from, in other states, I guess my belief is that's probably coming from what's been called the gray market. In other words, non-regulated cannabis producers, basement growers, things like that. Folks kind of operating more on the fringe. I mean, if you look at a legit business here in Colorado, there's so much skin in the game. There's so many employees whose lives are depending on that, whose income is depending on that it really doesn't make financial sense or really any sense of any kind to, cut corners and send stuff out of state. So I wouldn't be able to speak too much to that. I can only tell you, in my experience, are there going to be a few bad apples in any industry? Yeah, of course. Those are the ones, sadly, that make the headlines because of reefer madness. But I would say well over 95% of the business owners that I've met in this industry over the last 10 years, they're doing it by the book. A, because they want to, and B, because they have to.
Well, it's really good to hear that, because when I first started eXPO Financial Services 3 years ago, 80% of the people that heard our story about seed to CPA tracking as a financial institution, there's got to be a consistency in the financial statement, or we have to file a suspicious activities report.
Right.
Okay? That's a law. It's a FinCEN rule. 80% of the people didn't want anything to do with me. They were like, we're good. We don't need that. And I didn't really understand what that meant until I had somebody tell me one day, when somebody says we're good, that means they're content with what else they're doing. Today, it's about 20% of the people don't want to have anything to do with us, because whatever they're doing is going to probably come out in the compliance review. So it's really been refreshing seeing the flip in the last 3 years. And I like what you said there. Probably people growing in their home or their basement, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of look at it too, and most of the people that I've worked with, like he said, I mean, a lot of us are just thankful to be in this industry. I mean, I view, I think all of us really, we view ourselves as pioneers, and just the excitement that comes with that. Why would we jeopardize what we have going? I mean, it's just such an exciting thing to be a part of. That even 10 years ago, I would have never imagined that I'd be in this situation and doing what I'm doing. And every day is a blessing to be doing this. So, again, you're going to have your bad apples, but I feel like the majority of people in this industry are just thankful.
Right. Well, it's refreshing to hear you say that. So let's talk about money, cash. There's a lot of shadow banking going on out there. People that are pretending on a KYC, know your customer form, to be somebody different than they really are as a business. And there's a lot of people out there that have mislabeled who they were in credit card processing. So we came out with a system that helped to eliminate all that. But we've come out with a new product, so I'm curious what your thoughts are. I heard for a number of years that a manufacturer or a grower was shipping product across town or farther away, and when they got there, the person wasn't available, the money wasn't there. So we came out with an escrow account where the buyer placed the money into an escrow, locked it. We provided proof of funds, and when they got there, the person received the product, validated that it was what they thought they were buying, and then it was released. Do you see a place in the market for something like that?
I'm not sure. It's interesting what you're talking about. It's not something I've really thought of before. Obviously, there are escrow services out there for real estate purchases, license transactions, things like that. When it comes to selling the product business to business, I guess that's not a service that we've really considered too much. I can see why it would have some attraction just from a safety standpoint and
Dragging the cash back across town or...
Yeah. That said, I guess, I can't speak for other companies. We have a bank. We conduct our business openly. And thank you. And in any transaction, we always let it be known that we are a cannabis manufacturer, a cannabis producer. So if you were to look at any of our leases, anything like that, it says it all out there in the open.
Right.
And that's something that's really important to us. I think whether it's the cannabis industry or any other industry, your reputation still matters. And I know for Caleb, for myself, we're always playing the long game of we want to be honest, we want to be transparent, this is who we are and this is what we do. And so we're never trying to, pull a fast one. And I think that would extend all the way through any, wholesale transaction or anything like that. The good news is I would say, things can change at any moment, but right now I would say the majority of the Colorado cannabis industry is banked. And so we prefer to do everything in the form of a check. Why move hard cash around if you don't have to?
That's right.
And
well, actually, you're one of the very fortunate people. We're signing up a lot of clients here in Colorado, and we are obligated to ask, what were you doing before? And about 40% of them, 30% of them, said didn't have a bank account. 30% of them said we had a bank account, but we weren't really completely transparent on who we were because we just had to get a bank account. And the other 40% had a bank account, and there's 4 or 5, or I've heard 20, that are actually participating. So you're one of the very fortunate ones out there. Congratulations. And probably because of the way you run your business, I'm sure.
I mean, luck certainly plays a factor, but I think you make your own luck in this business.
Yeah. We still do. From the wholesale standpoint, I still deal with quite a few cash accounts. But I do. The industry is moving in a certain direction where, we're going to be as legitimate as anything else. Very soon here. So.
Right. Well, we all hope so.
Right.
So it's an interesting story. A large MIP told me that they had sent somebody with an invoice to pick up $10,000 for purchase of product, and when it came back, there was only $9,600 in the bag. And the gentleman, that was the owner of the company, said to me, "Can you tell me what happened to the other $400?" And I said, "Sure, I happen to be a subject matter expert in that area." So the first thing that happened is that the owner knew it was cash, so he pulled a few dollars off and took his own discount because no one would know. His bookkeeper may have lifted a few dollars off as well. The driver, few, and the lady downstairs, I'm sure you can find that she took a few too. And he said, it's interesting. I did an investigation on it. I pretty much found the same thing. So that's why we're trying to marry virtual currency and real currency at the same time on one platform. And so I appreciate your input there. It was valuable.
Yeah, I mean, anything we can do to, further this thing along, just to add the legitimacy of us, receiving payments, everything. I've even heard people, are like, I know there's a drive right now behind a cryptocurrency for the cannabis industry.
Right.
So.
Ruled illegal by the state.
Yes.
So do you have any plans on expanding beyond 5070 Oakland near the airport or outside of the state itself?
Yeah, of course. Colorado is a very mature market, and I grew up here. Colorado's near and dear to my heart. But went
to CU, right?
Yeah, went to CU and Fairview High School in Boulder before that. So, and actually, one of the other business partners in Seed and Smith is a childhood best friend of mine. We worked on science fair projects
nice.
together all the way up.
That's
so,
pretty cool.
Long history there. Of course, I think as the industry consolidates here in Colorado, which is kind of the natural course of any industry, you got to make sure that you're either growing or at least have a defensible position. And then a lot of the big markets are opening up now. California still has to kind of get their rules ironed out, and they're going to go through some of the same growing pains that Colorado went through. But we certainly have our eyes on the horizon. I think from our perspective, it's really the partners that you're in business with that make the most. That's the most important thing. So some of the stories that you're talking to me about in some of your experiences are just so foreign to me because I just haven't had those experiences, and maybe I've been lucky, or maybe I've just chosen my partners wisely. But when it comes to expansion, I think that's the most important thing: is how good is the market, and then how good are your partners.
So I've spent the majority of the last 2 years molding into a Frontier Airlines and a Southwest Airlines seat. I've traveled to about 10 states now, and I've met an enormous amount of people in this industry. And I get a chuckle every time I show up at a association meeting in a different state, particularly when it's rather new, and I hear I'm the best grower, I'm the biggest grower, I grow the best product.
Well, they were talking about us.
Yeah, I'm sure. So, but when we, as a company, as a federal financial institution, have to do a compliance review, we find out that they are missing an enormous amount of compliance, and more so, they're not taking advantage of all the opportunities. So one of them that we have fixed now by creating a seed to CPA tracking system that's blended or connected directly to an accounting system and then on the metric is one of my favorite topics, and that's 280 Cap E. So when these people are first getting their first audit or their first 280 Cap E tax, there's a gigantic shock. What have you all done to help offset that, if anything?
I could probably talk all day about how brutal and unfair IRS Code 280E is. It really is a killer. And it's something that honestly hurts American jobs. It doesn't just hurt the owners such as myself, but as you well know, 280E basically says that you can't take normal standard business deductions for anything related to trafficking, which has been defined in case law as really anything having to do with sales, whether that's on the retail side or the wholesale side. And so a good example is, we're a small business. We have 35 employees, about half of which are somehow sales related. Maybe not their entire job, but a portion of it. Well, we currently don't offer health insurance for our employees, and one of the reasons why is because of 280E. The health insurance that we would provide for those sales employees would be treated by the IRS as profit. So if I spend, let's say it's $50,000 to $75,000 a year on health insurance, not only am I spending that money, I'm also going to be treated by the IRS as having profited that, and then I would pay obviously the corporate income tax of somewhere in the 30 to 40% range on top of that, and that's a killer. And so, in addition to hurting obviously the profitability of the company, it really hurts American workers. I mean, these are great jobs. You can't outsource them to China. They are really some of the few jobs where you can work your way up from a low level all the way up. I mean, the American dream stuff that we've talked about, that we've grown up listening to, cannabis provides that.
Yeah, alive and well in cannabis.
But 280E is really squashing that right now. And so, your question was, what have we done to offset that? Some of them have been, we've had to make some really tough decisions. Health insurance is one of them. We obviously are smart about how we allocate our time. Our retail, for example, is much smaller than a traditional retail might be because, again, that portion of the rent is not deductible, things like that. So we understand the case law. We don't agree with it, but we try to do what we can, but really this needs to be changed. I think folks in Congress are starting to understand it, but it's complicated. You start talking tax law and people's eyes roll back in their heads. It was something for me as someone who'd never started their own business before. It was a big wake-up call for me, and it's something, frankly, that needs to change.
Yeah, that's a good point. So in 1982, a group of CPAs got together and figured out how to work around the loss of the write-off of the operating expenses. But most of the people in the industry have no idea. They've never heard of it before. So it's been upheld by the courts for five times now under challenge. And so we created the software. Actually, I won't take the credit for it. Another company created the software, but we white labeled it and incorporated our banking system into it to provide a compliant way to take all of your operating expenses and unitize them against your cost of goods sold. So we ought to get together one day, and I'll show you how that works, because the people that are using that aren't getting those tax bills any longer. And I get boxes of chocolate and flour sent to my house at IRS time. So we'll go over that another time, but it is a problem, and the government, fortunately, is starting to figure out that they need to fix things that are not helping grow the industry. So from the sales side, what are some of the surprising things that you run into from time to time, and think back and you say, "Wow, that's a shocker"?
I guess if I'm looking industry-wide, really just compliance issues, some of the things that we have to go through with Metric on a daily basis with even deliveries or shipping. With Seed & Smith and a few other companies, I've also built the shipping logistics departments, and just what we go through on a daily basis just to get something from point A to point B is just, it's crazy. We have to have, on our manifest, we manifest everything out. We have to have, the direct route of our drivers, with no deviance. So, that is the biggest shocker for me, just how, I understand that, and I welcome regulation, but some of it is just so overboard. It's, I don't even know I don't even know another industry I could compare it with. I know we're more regulated than even gaming, so,
right.
That'd be the biggest shocker for me in this industry.
Right.
Yeah, Caleb, that's a really good point. I think what I've seen over the last 9.5 years of being in the industry is that as lawmakers come in, every year, whether that's on the local, the state, or the national level, cannabis is in the news, it's sexy to regulate, and each lawmaker kind of wants to put his or her stamp on it. But a lot of these folks don't really know how it actually works, and so you just get layers and layers and layers and layers of red tape. Now the reefer madness is starting to come down, and the education level of lawmakers is creeping up a little bit, but that's one of the reasons that Seed & Smith has a tour. We offer this to incoming legislators. We allow the MED to send some of their newbies through the facility so that they can actually see how it works, so that when they're contemplating rule changes or law changes, that they actually have an understanding for what it's like for Caleb to have to, triple stamp, these manifests. I don't know. I guess the analogy I would use, I've traveled a lot, and I've spent a little bit of time in Africa, and some of the some of the poorest countries in the world have some of the most elaborate passports, and it seems like the fancier the passport and travel voucher and visa and stamp, kind of the worse the infrastructure is. And it sometimes feels like that in this industry of we have regulation for regulation's sake. And so, look, we want to be compliant. We understand that's how this industry works, and that's how we're able to operate. And so we want to operate compliantly, just as Caleb said. But if a lawmaker could staple themselves to an order, I think they'd realize, holy cow, this is kind of insane.
Kind of how some of the politicians staple themselves to a relative's cure of using CBD, and all of a sudden they flip-flop over to your side of the world instead of where they were staunchly opposed to it. I find a lot of humor in that.
That doesn't surprise me. I mean, statistics don't persuade a lot of people. What persuades people is how they feel, and when something hits home for them, whether it's whether it's anything, right? Whether it's taxes, whether it's loss of jobs or something like that. I mean, if you were to tell me some statistic about 1 million people died in this place that I've never been and I can't picture those people, that's not going to hit me as hard as if we're sitting here and I'm hearing about your relative that passed away and I see the pain in your face. And so with cannabis, I guess I would equate it to kind of GLBT rights of, if you don't know anybody who's gay or trans or anything like that, it's kind of easy to write some pretty heinous regulations. But if your cousin is gay or your sister is gay, all of a sudden, you think about things differently. I think when it comes to cannabis, cannabis isn't a cure-all, but God forbid, if I were ever to get cancer, you bet I'd be thinking about it, because at that point it gets very real, and it's not some abstract thing that you can think about. This is real people with real illnesses. 100%. That changes minds in a hurry.
It's interesting. 2013, I was a major payday loan processor, or part of a group of highly regulated industry, and the Obama administration decided that they wanted to get rid of that industry for a lot of reasons that we all are aware of. And so that was the end of that. I left and decided to start a virtual but non-fluctuating currency. And I never really considered the cannabis industry until I realized it was born, and for all sake, in 2014, and it wasn't until I went to a party and met a couple that had just recently moved here from New Jersey, because the governor there at that time decided to tell people, if you have a child with epilepsy, go to Colorado, maybe they can help you, which I find to be a disgusting thing to say to people, but that's what happened. And there was this little child that all of a sudden was in an epileptic seizure that I had never seen or experienced in my life. And there was the dad taking this little vial of something that I didn't know what it was, and dropping some liquid under the child's tongue. And in a short period of time, the child was close to back to what she was earlier. And it was that moment, that aha, inspirational moment, that I said, somebody has to solve the banking industry in the banking side of this industry, having never considered cannabis, didn't even want anything to do with it. So I understand what you're saying, and I wish there were YouTubes and movies that we could send to the politicians and go, look, this is real. Come on. So thank you for your input there.
It's interesting that you would mention that. I went out last year as part of NCIA's lobby days out to the Capitol, and NCIA does a great job of putting business owners together and just scheduling FaceTime with lawmakers. This isn't in my wheelhouse. I'm a small business owner, but just to be able to kind of tell the story. And what was fascinating, I'm talking last year, almost exactly a year ago, my team had been scheduled to meet with conservative lawmakers, and that was just where they told us to go, and they had it kind of booked out. And what was so interesting was that from a medical cannabis perspective, every single aide that we met with for politicians on Capitol Hill, really didn't have a lot of questions about the medical efficacy of cannabis. They had taken that as a given, and I'm really happy to see that progression move through even very conservative circles. One of the folks that we met with was a freshman lawmaker from a border county down in Texas, and even his aides really understood that, yeah, there is some medical benefit here. We need to do better testing, but it's there, and I'm really happy to see those inroads have gotten made.
So let's kind of get towards the end of our morning here. If I was coming to Colorado from some other place, and I wanted to go experience cannabis for the first time because I live in some state that doesn't have it, how would I know about Seed & Smith at 5070 Oakland, and whereabouts is that? What's the cross streets?
So Seed & Smith is the second closest retail to Denver International Airport. We're just north of I-70, close to Peoria Street, basically. And it's in a warehouse, but that's really where this stuff is produced. And so, we would invite tourists to come in, take the tour. Whether you're a seasoned cannabis expert or a brand newbie, this tour is going to blow your hair back. It's really something special. It's something we're proud of. I would say that's kind of step one. And then, thanks to Caleb, Seed & Smith products are now carried statewide. And that's something that is just growing.
You have your own brand.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It's growing by the day. Our current biggest challenge right now is we are struggling to fill all of the orders that we're getting.
Wow.
Because of Caleb's sales team and the work that he's done scaling. And so, like you said earlier, you haven't met a lot of people who say anything other than we grow the best, blah, blah, blah. Well, the proof is in the pudding. We
come take a tour.
Yeah, come take a tour.
We'll show you why.
Yeah.
We believe.
But how would I know? I'm flying here from North Carolina, and I have it in my mind that I want to go check something out. And there's this huge amount of places in Colorado. I mean, Broadway is like every other store, it seems like, that's out there. How would I know to find you? Or anybody?
Yeah.
But you in particular.
There are a number of resources that people use. Some folks use, search platforms such as Weed Maps, Leafly, obviously Google, Yelp, things like that. We're all over that, and we've got great reviews. The other thing is we've done a good job partnering with a lot of the tour companies. So if people wanted to, I went to South Carolina a few years ago, and I took a food tour there. It was awesome. Had this great Southern food. And, we partner with a lot of the tour companies that will do some sort of sushi, sake, joint rolling thing. They'll take people around. Yeah. Sometimes they'll visit Seed & Smith and then take folks up to Red Rocks or something like that.
Okay. So we had Danny Schaefer here our second podcast. So he's one of those that you're on his tour?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Danny ran over 150 people through our facility in this month.
Yeah, this
and,
month alone.
we love My 420 Tours. They do a great job.
Beautiful. That makes sales a little easier, huh?
Oh, yeah.
So we're creating a membership organization nationally. So we're moving into Florida, Pennsylvania, Illinois. We have Montana coming on next. Nevada should be hooking in shortly. And then the big prize would be California from a volume side. So we expect to hit about 1 million members sometime in the next year. And one of the things that we want to do is drive membership to our members, like drive our members to members. And I was telling your other gentleman earlier in another podcast that we want to do concerts in the parking lot and have a pop-up band. And we bought Weedstream.net, which is the music and the sound, and they have a weed streamer. Have you ever seen that, where you can go in there and medicate?
Yeah,
Smoke?
I've seen a few things. I'm not sure if it's yours specifically, but yeah, I've seen something like that.
Yeah. So one of the things we want to do is drive those members. So we got a phone call from a lady that is one of the top people in Hawaii, and she said there are 20 million mainlanders that come to Hawaii. Can you direct our members to our dispensaries in Hawaii? So we're starting to resonate there, and I'm hearing the same thing. It's a competitive market. Everybody's looking for that next angle of how to get the people through the turnstile. So we're looking forward to working with you guys in the future.
Absolutely.
Do you have any questions about us and what we do? And flip the flip the microphone for a second.
I think, my takeaway is you guys are doing a lot of really cool things, and I'd
Thank
like to learn more about it. So, that's
Absolutely.
certainly something that we need to look into
Thank you.
further.
Yeah, we'll set something up this week. I mean, we welcome anybody and everybody to come through our facility and even just talk about being a partner with us in the growth of this industry.
Yeah. I'm really looking forward to taking your tour. I do that behind the scenes, but
Yeah.
it's just more informally. And
Yeah, what's the saying? Rising tide raises all ships. So, I mean, we are definitely open for, discussion with anybody out there to, help grow this thing.
yeah. Well, you guys have been great guests. I really appreciate you coming on board and let me grill you for a few
Yeah,
minutes.
we
And,
appreciate it, too.
but most particularly, if you're coming to Denver or you live in Colorado, Seed & Smith at 5070 Oakland sounds like a really great place to go, and I'd be proud to forward people to you. So.
Well, thank you very much. And I guess the only other thing I'll say here is, thanks to Caleb's efforts, you can find Seed & Smith products absolutely everywhere. So
Yeah.
whether you're near the airport or you're on the western slope or up in Boulder or down south, you're going to see us. We're coming pretty hard.